joining us. Today with me, I have Chris Paloukas with me. Thanks for joining us, Christos.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi. A quick note before we start with Christos. We stream these live events every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time and 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you have any questions, you can always ask us during the live session. And if you are watching a recorded version, you can always send us an email at questions@marpress.com. And don't forget, please, to like and subscribe to the channel so you are notified of future episodes. We can start with Christos. Christos is one of the many people I've met at WordCamp Europe. We met in Greece, right? Was it 2-3 years ago?
Yeah.
In
I
Athens.
think 3.
Yeah, 3 years ago. Yeah, correct. Yes. Are you going to be there this year in
Not sure. It's going to be a last-minute thing.
Okay, good. Hopefully we'll see you there anyway.
Yeah,
we'll be there for sure. We'll be sponsoring as well.
Oh,
And
good.
hopefully, we'll see you there. Come and visit the booth. We'll give you some free merchandise.
For sure. It's all about the swag.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always. Do you want maybe to give us a brief introduction, Christos, of maybe
Yeah.
do you do WordPress?
I'm Christos. I'm the performance engineer at Pressidium, manage WordPress hosting, and I've been there for 3 years. Right around then it started like my more serious approach or more serious involvement in the WordPress community. Before that, it was only like, I don't know, I'd made a couple WordPress websites in the past. Just that. But WordPress was my go-to because we learned to use WordPress from school. I went to school in the States, so I was born and raised in Burbank, Illinois, outside of Chicago. Well, born in Evergreen Park, I guess, but anyway, I went to school in Burbank. And I came to Athens, Greece 15 years ago now. April 22nd, actually. In a couple of days, it'll be 15 years.
Nice. Congrats.
15-year anniversary. I only had the idea to live here for 2 years, but I never left.
Good. So you said you learned WordPress at school. Like, was it part of a kind of like wider subject about IT website, or like what was it about?
Good question. So, like the path in the States, when like the school path, I don't know what it's called, the curriculum, I guess, started off with Electronics 1, where you would learn to use light switches and like plugs. It was funny too, because we had these like boards where you had to install all these things, and a lot of kids would get shocked. And 15 years ago, when in high school, it would be okay for your teacher to laugh at you for getting shocked with 220 volts.
Yeah, I mean,
now it's a loss.
Something similar, yeah, definitely.
And then there's electronics too, and then you had the opportunity to do computers and networking. And in that computer and networking class, in your either 3rd or 4th year, we were introduced to WordPress as we didn't know what a CMS was, to be honest, but as like a way to make a website.
Nice. Interesting, very interesting. But we have a few live guests already. Hello, everyone's saying hi, just saying hello. Thanks for joining us. That's interesting. So you've learned WordPress at school, and then you started taking WordPress seriously, and you became a performance engineer. I'm completely I know, of course, what web hosts are, and roughly have an idea how they work, but I was never like involved in the interns of like. To start off, what is the job of a performance engineer at a web host? Is it like what is like your day-to-day tasks, or like what do you do at work?
That could be complicated. So I do have a systems background, but I don't do like SRE work, like server reliability engineer work. We have a separate team for that. The performance engineer position is more about analyzing. It could be front end, could be back end. The performance team does work with both front end optimizations for websites specifically and the back end optimizations for the actual systems. It could be locating bottlenecks or trying to find out what part of the infrastructure on the back end side is slow and why it's slow, and if we can do something about it. And then there's what I said first, the performance analysis, testing, lots of testing. So load testing, stress testing, using initially JMeter, but I was quite limited, and I made the switch to using K6. K6 is a very flexible, is the word. Very flexible tool, because you just write like PHP in the script, and you're not limited by the I think they're called plugins. I don't remember the JMeter uses, and it's much simpler. It's much more flexible. It's simpler. It's not easier. It's simpler. So there's a misconception in IT between the words easy and simple, right? Simple is not necessarily easy, but it is rewarding. So what we do with load testing, do you want me to go into that, or is it too
No,
much?
go, of course. No, I mean, like, don't worry. Explain it, please.
What we do with load testing is when we have to onboard a like larger, like an enterprise or a premium site customer, we want to put the customer in the best plan that we can, right? And this is the fun part. We get to engage and like talk to the actual client and try to find out what the request path kind of looks like. Request path is the wrong word. User journey. What the user journey looks like when people access the site. So maybe it's like an e-shop that they have commercials on TV and they expect certain spikes on certain days of the week or during a sale of some sort, right? And then we ask them, what's the user journey generally look like? You go to the homepage, maybe you probably don't go to the homepage if it's on a campaign. Maybe you go to a landing page of some sort and you go to a certain product, you take the product, you put it in your cart, you go through the checkout process. And that's one user journey. That's one test routine. I take that, we kind of automate that in a sense using K6 or JMeter. And then we use virtual users, concurrent users, call them whatever you want, to simulate kind of, I don't want to say the word real because you can't simulate real user activity, but it's simulated user activity on the website to see if that particular website, because every website is nature is completely different from another, to see how that particular website reacts on the infrastructure that it's being hosted on, so we can see if it works for the client, like if it's going to be fast. Well, first, if it's going to still be up and be available, like you don't want to get any timeouts or anything like that. That's the first thing we want to get out of the way.
Of course.
And then there's response times. Even though you have your sale of some sort going on, or you have maybe you always have like a lot of users, or you have some sort of news site, or an LMS site with like lots of logged in users in a small period of time. That's always a hard one. Like when you have an exam and the exam is on a certain day and hour like scheduled. Yeah. So we run the test, we get all the data back, and then we can go to the client with confidence and say, hey, it's going to work. It's going to work with, I don't know, 200 concurrent users on your website.
I see. So you work, do you work more kind of thing like testing website, or do you work more on the infrastructure of the web hosting, or a bit of both?
I'd say a little bit of both, but most of the infrastructure, if not 99%, is covered by the SRE team and the DevOps support team too. But the SRE team has all that covered.
Interesting. And just like, what are the most common performance issues? I mean, there's the things that like people like me who are like, I'm technical, but I'm not technical into web hosting, but
Yeah.
performance. But yeah, the normal caching and stuff. But what are like the most common or the top two problems you typically see in regards to performance, or like in these type of scenarios? For example, a big customer is onboarding with Pressidium, for example, and yeah, you find out it's there are some bottlenecks somewhere. Like, what are the most common issues you find typically with websites?
It's an easy one. It all revolves around badly built sites around some part. So maybe it's a certain plugin that you have doing some request in the WP options table. That's it's going to be a huge table if you have a bunch of plugins that you use, or again, if you do have like an LMS site and you have all the users as like quiz information, or what's it called when they record the recorder for where they're at a certain course, and you use a certain
like they
plugin.
record the stage, keep a record where they are, at which stage. Yeah, I can imagine, and they store all those kind of like in the options table, which can be.
Yes, exactly. But then let's say you want to, or you created some custom plugin. It's usually something like that, a custom plugin that goes in and tries to find out how many users completed X course. And then there's a query. The query fires off, and the query takes longer than 120 seconds to load. You're probably going to have a timeout if you're waiting for something like on the page to load. That's one thing. That's on the back end side of things. What else happens on the back? Sites that aren't built in a cacheable way.
And that means, like, can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I am familiar with the front end caching, but yeah, like most probably there are some more things one can do. No,
there are. Okay, so caching does happen in layers, and we had a huge talk about caching with Remkus the videos on YouTube for the within WordPress podcast. We won't get into that much detail, but sure, something could be better cached at the database level. You could make that particular plugin that I mentioned, that custom plugin, work better with maybe Redis object caching, so the queries don't have to hit the database all the time to get all the information. Transients are amazing. If you want to get like one specific number, you don't need it to, maybe you want to count how many users are part of the whatever course or whatever plan on your site, and you want to display it on your homepage. You don't need that to be live. You don't need every time someone loads the page for that query to fire off on the back end, so you can say that, oh, I have 1,800 users. No, you could do that once a day. Just once a day, the first time someone does it, and then that's cast.
That's scarcely transient, right? And then, of course, or something else, that value.
I would use a transient for that. Transients are fun. You can get into big trouble with transients too, like show a lot of wrong data and not being conscious of when it expires. So for like the people watching that might not know what that is, it's something that you could write into your code, or a short code where you tell it that the first time someone maybe visits a page or does a certain action, let's say visits a page to make it simple, only then will you run the query to count how many active users you have on your website to get that number, and then that number is stored. So the next time someone accesses your website, you're going to have that number there already, like really quick. And it's up to you. You configure it for how long it like lives, because eventually, maybe the next day, for this example, it would run again after 24 hours from the first time being run, and you would have the new number, which the new number would still be in, like, it would be the right number for the next 24-hour period.
Interesting. Yeah, and you can set, of course, the expiration time for the transient or so. So, of course, for it to become more efficient, right? Otherwise, you can show data that is 24 hours old, and that's not, Good. So that is from the website side. When it comes to web hosting, I've used quite a few myself over the years. There are some things which you can notice between one another, but like in terms of performance per se, and like caching and all this stuff, like because like nowadays let's say the top tier web hosts, roughly in terms of performance, at least from my opinion, they're roughly within the same range. Like what typically, excluding the website itself, what the user can do, the website owner, what do typically web hosts do in terms of like for them to stand out, for the web host to be faster, for example, like at Pressidium, like do you have anything specific that in terms of performance makes it better or faster?
So you see me thinking really hard, because I don't want to go straight to caching, because I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about caching. But using recent software, using good operating system, let's go all the way back to the like nitty-gritty parts. Using something that's both highly available but both fast. Like you can't rely on certain shared file system technologies and still give optimal performance. One thing Presidium did recently is that we are in like a transition period of taking our shared file system technology off of whatever we used to use to CephFS, which is super fast, especially in comparison to, I don't know, older technologies, which is really like one of the biggest bottlenecks in hosting too. The actual where you save your information and how you have that information still be highly available. What else? You could also implement some like features in between the database itself. So hosting happens in layers, everything happens in layers. And if you go past like the first networking layers, the security layers, the networking layers, and go into the actual server, like the Apache or Nginx, whatever everyone likes layer, that then talks to the database layer, and you could do some stuff in between there, like configure some things like it's a little old, HyperDB, or the word, I don't remember the technology for another similar product.
It's okay.
It has a certain level of database caching. It's not coming to me, but it's okay.
Yeah.
That's one thing you could do. I keep avoiding the main one. So caching, how you implement caching as a host is huge. There are so many ways to do it too, and there's so many different types of caching. It's like one word for so many things. Implementing caching from a web host perspective for high performance has to include something close to the client. So if not edge caching, it has to be in the beginning of the hosting layers, what we described before, where security happens too. You're in MailerPress, you know about security. You
Yes,
know that
yes.
you should secure things as close to the, I don't know, customer or where the threat can come from. The closer it is, then the safer all the systems are behind it. And then you need, well, sure, you need what are they called in English? Fail safes.
The faces. Yeah, okay.
Yes, even in the other layers. But the closer it is to the customer, the better it is. The same goes for performance. Security and performance actually go hand in hand in lots of things.
I was going to say, because you mentioned, like, which honestly never crossed my mind, like when it comes to performance, one of a part, of course, from all the technologies, caching and stuff. One of the best practices is to always use the latest software, latest technology, and that applies, quite frankly, to everything: performance, reliability, and security. Like in all fairness, like if you look at the majority of hacks that happen on WordPress websites, they're like hacks exploiting vulnerabilities in plugins, in older plugins, because usually, like, almost every plugin has its own share of vulnerabilities, and as long as the vendor releases the patches, it's fine. But most people like fail to upgrade these plugins, so they're still running some old version or some old version of WordPress core, which still has some old vulnerability. Yeah, so just by running the latest version of software, not just for your website, by the way, everything, your mobile, your computer, you are doing a favor to yourself, right? In terms of performance, security, and reliability, right? I mean, like,
Exactly. I mean, take a silly example, forcing people to use more recent versions of PHP. That could break a site, and it probably has broken lots of sites, especially from like the 7.4 onward shift. But it has to happen at some point. And as a managed WordPress host, Pressidium is in that awkward position most of the time where we kind of have to be like, hey, your core has to be updated now. We have to update it. It's not really okay. We can wait some longer time. We can put a delay of sorts on it, but then we're going to bug you about it again in, I don't know, 2 weeks. And we have to update your core. You cannot be on a old version of WordPress or on a very old version of PHP on a managed WordPress host.
it is a headache, no? Because I imagine, like, plugin vendors like us, it is also a headache because, of course, like, it's not just about performance, but also when, like, you'd like to use something, you'd like to develop a new feature, for example, and you'd like to use some sort of new, I don't know, like some new function or whatever, and like you can use it in PHP 8, 8.4, and then you find out that, oh, it's not available in 7.4, for example. And for backward compatibility, instead of writing, I don't know, 4 or 5 lines of code and it's efficient, you have to write, I don't know, 20, 30 lines of code, work around, you know. How do you deal with it? It's a very good question, actually, because I know even like WordPress themselves, core, they like to support old versions of PHP, which in a way sometimes makes sense because, of course, you need some sort of backward compatibility. But sometimes I see it a lot from plugin developers, even as like, it would be nice to push people to use a more recent version. Like, is it like still a big problem? As you're saying, like, I'm sure like you are nudging users like, hey, you cannot keep running this version of core, this version of PHP. Is it like you still find a lot of pushback, or is it like you slowly like people are becoming more used to using the latest version?
For the most part, there isn't any pushback, like for the most part, to be honest. But there's always going to be like that very small percentage of sites, or where you have like an older site that was developed by a developer, I don't know, X number of years ago, that just breaks when you switch to a more recent version of PHP. Yeah, at some point they have to update.
It happens with our plugins as well. I think it's also, is it a question of legacy software? Sometimes they might have some custom plugins somewhere, as you're saying, someone wrote 10 years ago and it's doing some integration with their old accounting software, you know?
Yeah, well, it's probably going to be something like that, because something like MailerPress, for example, it's going to be updated, and you probably have updated MailerPress to work with every latest version of PHP because you want your product to first work and second sell, right?
Exactly. I mean,
yeah. So most plugin developers, I want to believe, are very conscious about compatibility.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. By the earlier on, of course, as you said, like, caching is a universal word because it can be used for a lot of things. While researching about this topic, and you mentioned it already, like I was reading a bit about edge caching. It's like, first, like, is CDN and edge caching the same, or like maybe can you explain like what is the difference? For I mean, I'm not that familiar with it myself, so like what is exactly edge caching, and maybe if there are differences with CDN, and what's the concept of it?
So edge caching. Let's start with, it's not a buzzword. Edge literally refers to a network edge. So Presidium, I don't really know if I should be talking about this yet, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I mean, you don't have to. Don't feel obliged by them. Just you can explain the concept in general. You don't have to. It's up to you. So
the best way to explain the concept is explaining it from our actual work, though. So what we're working on now, and it's going to be coming out very soon, is edge caching provided in a sense, kind of, not really though, kind of how it's done by Cloudflare. I'm only using that example because it's better known throughout the ecosystem. And what happens with edge caching? There's lots of different types of edge caching. You can even consider just a plain old CDN, like what you're used to, for static assets. Static assets meaning JavaScript files, images, CSS files. Yeah, so in a typical old CDN situation, you have that stuff uploaded somewhere to this network of lots of nodes, and you have those nodes in lots of places around the world, lots of providers do it, and your static assets will be closer to the person trying to access your website. So the website will load faster, right? So you can consider that something like edge caching. You've kind of cached, well, not kind of, you have literally cached your CSS, your static assets. What's missing is a page cache, the actually generated HTML. So PHP doesn't have to run on WordPress, or so you don't even have to reach the caching engines or caching layers that your hosting provider might provide, because everything's in layers. There's the edge that we talked about before. Where's my hand? There's the edge. I'll put it over here. There's the edge, and then there's the infrastructure of your actual hosting provider. So you can have caching happening here too, where in security wise, this is where you would have your web access firewall. You could have caching happening there too. We currently do employ that kind of caching using Varnish. We use a hot and a warm layer. So having adaptive layers is important too. The difference is that, well, in our situation at least, the difference is that on the hot layer, everything is in memory, and memory is super fast, we all know.
Yeah.
And then the warm layer, there's no cold, hot and warm. Cold would be uncached. The warm is on SSDs. Edge caching pushes it even further, even closer to the client or the person trying to access the website. Now you have your HTML, your fully functional web page. There's a good way to put it, as close to the client as possible, because you have multiple POPs, points of presence, they're called, as close to the client as possible. But even that's a game, right? So in developing the solution that provides edge caching with, I don't remember how many points of presence at Presidium, we had to figure out the balance. Well, we had to make something WordPress specific, right? Because something WordPress specific with specific rules for WordPress on the security side of things and on the performance side of things simply isn't available. And to do something similar with other services, you might end up paying $200 a month. Plus, you would need like the technical know-how to. I think you might know what service I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You would need to employ, I think you're limited to like 50 different rules for the WAF at that level, or maybe 100, which aren't enough. They simply aren't enough. Plus, then you can't really apply like new rules for things that like zero do things. Something happened really recent and you wanted to apply a certain rule to block traffic of a certain sort at the network edge. You're totally limited in the sense of using a product like that limits you with how many rules you could use. We wanted to take that off the administrator, off the user, and have all that automated, right? So everything is going to be automated and working really well for security for WordPress websites. Specifically again for WordPress websites from a security standpoint with the WAF rules, but also with the rules that you want to have in optimally caching a WordPress website on the edge, like what to cache, what not to cache, basically. I mentioned the points of presence before.
Yes, yeah.
You can get yourself in really big trouble with having too many points of presence. So people
Like
get.
what, for example?
I'm sorry.
What kind of problems can you have with having too many? Because in theory, I'm not familiar with this technology. So in theory, my mind is like, the more pops you have, of course, the more clients you can serve. So
you can technically, but the more points you have, the more chances you have for a cache hit and a cache miss ratio, like a high cache miss ratio. Because if you have, like, I don't know, 30 different points of presence in a relatively small country like Greece, or if we even go smaller like Athens, what's going to guarantee that you're going to hit a point of presence that has a cached version of your website?
Interesting.
So it needs that balance, right? And I'm not sure, but we're quite confident that Presidium, that there isn't something WordPress specific on the market that solves, all these WordPress specific security and performance issues on the edge.
So in theory, you as clearly as you explained, like caching, performance, and security, first of all, it seems like they go hand in hand, especially on a web host. And when it comes not just to performance, also security, the more you can move towards the edge, which means nearer to the website visitor and further away from the source, which is the web server and database, the better it is. So you're talking about, like, you have to have also different levels of, or different types of security services through every different layer at the web host, right?
And now we're just talking about, like, someone actually accessing something on your website, right? We're not even going into the other security things that you need. I know MailerPress does them, like the malware scanning. That's a whole different thing.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a whole different thing. Interesting. So in theory, in theory, when someone requests, if everything is working correctly, caching aside, when someone requests the homepage of your website or whatever, the request doesn't even reach the actual web server. It just addressed somewhere to the caching service. In theory, of course, right? Like,
yeah, well, in practice too, I guess, because it would go through. Let's say it's not cached, and it's the first time someone's visiting it in Athens, Greece, for that example.
And the web server, let's say the data center is in US. So usually, like, can you walk us through the process, like what happens for the users to get an idea? Like, your request goes, you type, I don't know, google.com, for example.
Yes.
What happens from
I love talking about the WordPress path, and I still haven't really found the best way to talk about it, like with visuals. But
feel free to expand on it. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's going to be another attempt. Here we go. So you do type google.com. Then your computer kind of says, or your browser says, where is google.com? I have to translate this google.com, this domain, into some address, the IP address. IP addresses are used for routing on the internet, for anyone not aware. Then, okay, there could be caching at that level too. I don't want to get into that. So your browser can do DNS caching, so that lookup doesn't have to happen. Caching is basically a smart way to do less work. So if your browser already knows that Google's IP address is, I don't know, 10.4.6.16, then that request doesn't have to happen. But let's say it happened. Now your browser knows where Google is, and it makes a request to that IP address, goes through the internet and everything between to find the server that google.com is located on. Google.com is a terrible example because it's...
I'll just use a WordPress website. Don't worry. Just use any other WordPress website. Yeah.
Just for the name.
Pressidium.com, for example, just to give you an idea.
Or that, Pressidium. Let's say it's located in the US and I'm located in Greece. Now the request has gotten captured. Let's say there's some infrastructure in front too, like what I mentioned before, there being a WAF and there being some like caching engine in front, but it's also not cached there. So it's going to go further back. It's going to hit the web server. The web server is going to be something like Nginx or Apache. There's also going to be a firewall at that level too. Even though we passed the WAF, there's going to be a firewall at the level before the Apache and maybe something within Apache as well. So it kind of goes hand in hand again. Yep. Then WordPress is going to run. So PHP is going to run. It's going to go through the process of generating the website that I requested. There might, well, in most situations, there's going to be a database request too. So we can fill in some of the blanks that the PHP part needs in order to generate the HTML of the website. So now it's another layer that goes even the proxy SQL was what I was looking for before.
Yes, proxy
Sorry.
SQL. I remember. Yeah. Okay. Good.
So there might be, you could use proxy as well for security stuff too. So there might be more things in between the web server layer and the database layer. You can also do caching there. You could do caching there using Redis, or you could do SQL query polling using something like what I mentioned, proxy SQL at that level. But anyway, I'm getting off track. You
That's
got
fine.
your response from the database. Your PHP is happy. You've got all the information, the values that you need to fill in the blanks in the code. Your HTML is generated, and then all of that has to go back the way it came. So it goes through the first level caching engine, if that exists. It goes through it doesn't necessarily go through the firewall, but it goes through the infrastructure.
I mean, it goes out to the fire. It
Through
depends.
the network again and reaches your browser.
Nice.
Let's say you do have caching, and you do have caching at the edge now, and you do the same thing. So you type google.com, you get the IP address for google.com, and now your website from the previous request is in Athens. I don't have to go to the States, and I don't have to find the server for Pressidium.com or google.com or whatever, and PHP doesn't have to run, and the database query doesn't have to run.
So you
end up
load
cutting all that.
the page directly from the cache server, basically.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the IP, just for those who don't understand, maybe like the IP of the caching server might be different than the IP of the actual web server. So how would that work, basically? Or like the IP that the DNS server gives is actually the IP of the caching server, and then it's up to the caching server to check if it's cached and goes the request back to all the layers back and forth, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in your DNS records, you're going to put the IP address provided by your edge caching solution, or you're going to host your DNS on that edge caching solution. Like on Cloudflare, you know how you host your DNS on Cloudflare, and then Cloudflare is responsible for your DNS too. That's one way too. And in the situation that there is no edge caching at all, you're going to give the IP address of the servers that are up front in the infrastructure of the hosting provider, like on their network edge, not on the internet edge.
So in reality, if you access Pressidium.com, for example, through all the caching, my browser is never, my computer is never directly connecting to the web server hosting Pressidium.com, but the caching services and all the others, and then of course the request is going through all these hops and layers and back from that. I'm never direct. Good, interesting. Very, very interesting.
It could get even worse. I mean, I don't know if this is employed as a solution, to be honest, but you could be given like a multicast address, so it's one that has one-to-many connection.
Nice.
But that's like really nitty-gritty networky stuff. At the end of the day, what you have to know is your provider has to tell you that, set your A record to this, or in the situation that they do your DNS hosting too, they will say set your name servers to ns1.presidium.com or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. Good. It's very interesting. Definitely. There's a lot to learn from the web host point of view. In terms of performance and WordPress, like as a performance engineer, like are there any common performance bottlenecks you see in WordPress, and maybe are things that can, regardless of the host where your website is hosted, WordPress as a platform, like are there any typical bottlenecks that you see and maybe you'd like to see
on the front end? Very often on the front end, and it usually has to do with just like overloaded sites. Why I mentioned the front end now. Lately, we've been running this performance audit service where we just give a free performance audit for the front end of websites, not every page of the website, because then it can't be free.
But it's good to know. We didn't know that all that. Yeah, it's good to know. So yeah, people can go and look for that hopefully and benefit from it. Good.
Yeah. Plus it gives me and like the performance team chances for more experience, because again, every website is so totally different. But anyway, what we see is like using redundant plugins, using one plugin that does the same job as another plugin, using Yoast alongside with all-in-one SEO. Why?
I really honestly like I've seen it myself. I'm an admin on a Facebook group, WordPress security, like it's just for beginners,
Mhm.
people asking questions. And because a lot of people ask about this, like, hi, I'm running like 3 or 4 firewalls. It's like
Right.
actually it's not just a performance, it's actually it usually leads to a lot of technical issues as well, right? I mean,
You have more chances to have some sort of vulnerability, yeah, because you have more, I don't know, more eggs in your basket, more chances of those eggs getting rotten.
yeah. Could it be something that the vendors, web hosts, or like the people who are involved, like the others, and not the users? Maybe there's a message that we're not that's not clear enough, that we're not delivering to users, that we can do better to help. Because the same, not just with SEO, I've seen it with firewall plugins, with everything. Like, yeah, I'm running 3 different SEO plugins. I'm running 4 different firewalls. Like, is there maybe
Yeah.
something?
Okay, so this is the question of like where the responsibility of the host might start.
Maybe.
Let's discuss the security part that you know lots about too. If your hosting provider has you covered as much as possible and gets all the information that they should get from all the repositories that the security oriented ones like patchstack is amazing
Yep.
for WordPress. And you then, as you don't need something that does the firewall on the actual WordPress installation itself, because I mean, if something got into WordPress already, you're screwed. I mean, it's already there,
Yeah.
and it's a single point of failure. Having something like WordFence installed is good if you don't have any other solution, but it's a single point of failure. The WordFence itself can be manipulated,
It's a
and
plugin after all. It works with
yeah.
application. It was different. Yeah.
Yes, and we actually have plugins like that in a list of banned plugins where customers can install them, but then they get removed automatically after a certain amount of time, unless the customer reaches out and says, "Hey, I need this for whatever reason," and then we open up a dialogue. But recently, I was asked why the X performance, or sorry, security plugin was not available on the platform, because when you have a site hosted at Pressidium and probably most other managed hosts, and you go into the plugin directory to install a plugin, you get a little message saying that, oh, this is in our banned plugins list for this reason. And he was concerned because his client said that, oh, we need a security plugin. So he came to me and he's like, oh, I need a security plugin. And I was like, no, you don't. You don't. I mean, it's all covered by us because we get all the information for the vulnerabilities. We update it on the fly, and we notify you if you have a certain plugin that's of X version that has, I don't know, X vulnerability. You get an email saying, hey, you have a problem. We disabled the plugin, but you have to update the plugin, or we'll force the update on the plugin. Forcing the update on the plugin is bad because you might have changed something, or you might have added something custom, and then it might break your site. So there's always like this little game that you have to play, this little
Of
balancing
course.
act,
Yeah, I can imagine.
because you can't just force everything. You can't force updates on everything. You can't force everything to be on the latest version of everything. You need that communication with the client, but you need ways for the client to see it too. So this is actually a good discussion, because I don't know what the best way is. The dashboard, the Presidium dashboard, because managed hosting used to be you just have a dashboard for doing things with buttons instead of using cPanel or Webmin. I used to like Webmin.
Yeah, I used to love it as well, but yes,
Yeah.
it's quite old actually.
But it was hard. Like, there's a huge learning curve, and there's so many like buttons you have to press to, I don't know, configure an SSL certificate. So managed hosting used to be like, oh, look, we have a dashboard and you have buttons, but now it's so much more, because now it's like we're offloading security onto us. We're offloading your performance issues. Not all of them. You could still need a performance plugin for something like minifying your JS or CSS if it's not already being done. But the caching part, it's done. It's really hard to convince customers too that they don't need a certain caching plugin.
Yeah, because so basically, with what you were saying, especially like in this case, Presidium, I know like a lot of managed WordPress web hosts are moving more towards the direction. So yeah, technically speaking, you don't need I wouldn't say any security plugin, but you don't need the typical firewall plugin, because of course, and the
Mhm.
typical caching plugin because at least at a higher, they are being addressed at a higher level from Presidium.
Yeah, yeah,
You,
yeah.
you will still need plugins, of course, when it comes to security, like 2FA most probably. You still need to be careful with managing good user roles, and enforcing maybe some specific logins from specific IPs. But in terms of attacks, like that firewall blocks, that's handled by Presidium, right?
Yeah. And limiting logging attempts is handled. 2FA is not handled. You have an amazing plugin for that.
Thanks. Yeah, we try our best. We haven't released an update in a few months, but it's because we've been working on a very big update. We're going to support passkeys as well. Hopefully, we'll do that as mainstream for WordPress as well, because they're quite. What are your thoughts on passkeys?
Yeah, that kind of stuff is missing, and like SSO is missing too.
Yep.
But then again, like, so where's the demarcation point? I don't know. It can be anywhere. I mean, the more a host can provide, the better. But I mean, it's always best. So you can't. Presidium is not going to make the whole vulnerability, virtual patching, distribution infrastructure that PatchStack has been building for, I don't know how old PatchStack is, for so many years with 30 people. No, that doesn't make sense. So doing something like partnering with MeloPress, for instance, as a hosting provider, and having that 2FA option available to all your customers, it's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, and so even like as you were saying, in terms of vulnerability management, using something like PatchStack, and clearly you're doing it right, because I think, to be honest, like the fact that customers do not have to have their own firewall plugin, another step, another layer in the whole request path, and don't have to have a caching plugin. It also makes it, first of all, the website less problematic, not because these plugins give problems, but of course, you're running more software. So if you want to do something custom, of course, the chances of encountering something that might break is higher. And I'm presuming, especially since you as a web host, you are doing it at a much bigger scale, you can be much faster as well, right? Like your servers, your firewall level at Presidium, I'm pretty sure it's way faster than a plugin on a single install.
Oh, for sure. Because I mean, again, if the request reaches the actual website, if it goes into WordPress, it's too late.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's going to take time. It's going to take time to go through, I don't know, the whole internet, to go through our systems. Okay, these are all milliseconds, but milliseconds is what performance is about. You optimize things like millisecond by millisecond by millisecond at the end of the day.
It's not about reducing 2 seconds all of a sudden. It's just, as you were saying, like when you are improving the performance of a website, you're just eating away these small bits and pieces. And then the idea is, at the end of the day, you manage to take it down, but you reduce 1 second, but you didn't reduce it by just one change. It's just one small change at a time. And that builds up, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the less is more is always the good mentality.
Exactly. To be honest, that's the same with I always try to explain it to people. It's the same with security. There's not like, I installed the firewall, I'm done. No, there are layers to these things. Even starting with the most basics. Let's forget firewalls and all of that. Starting with the most basic things, like using proper user roles, keeping your software up to date, using decent passwords, and ideally implementing 2FA. You're already like a few steps ahead of the typical attack, because most of the attacks seen not just in WordPress, on the web today, are automated attacks, just scanning around. So if you keep your software up to date, and you have some decent, Andreas sent you a comment, Christos, I love your background.
Thank you. Thank you,
Andreas. It's just doing these small things, basic user hygiene, and you're already like a few steps ahead, and your website is already quite secure, quite frankly. Anyway,
on a systems level too, for security, the security is so standardized that for them in most situations, if you leave it like configured as default configuration, because it's so standardized, you're probably going to be very safe. Things like performance, not standardized at all. It's
it's
a wild west.
Exactly. And I'm sure from today's talk, it's kind of like eye-opening how much, because it's very easy to point fingers at the web host, like, they should update all the plugins. But once you speak to someone like who's been on the working with the web host, you realize how many problems you encounter because some user has a very old plugin and you cannot just push them to update the core, and you have to find that balance, like, listen, what's going to happen, kind of thing. So
Yeah, but they have to do it at the end of the day, or something has to happen.
of course,
I wanted to mention too. You mentioned the balance. No, I mentioned the performance not being standardized. If we trace back into what I mentioned before about the multiple points of presence and having caching work really fast and everything, and you wanting to have a good balance of points of presence, so your content can actually be cached by those points of presence. Another thing to think about. Sorry, just came to thought.
that's good.
Is cache invalidation, right? So when you make a change to a certain page, most providers have like automated tasks, or if you install like WP Rocket, great plugin for
Yes,
some
it's one of the
performance
best.
stuff.
Yeah,
Definitely. They also have a mechanism that once you I don't know, create a new post or edit a post, that post is then flushed from the cache. And Presidium and other managed WordPress hosting providers integrate the same thing. So like for example, on WP Rocket specifically, when you push clear cache, or when you trigger some sort of action that causes part of the cache or the entire cache to be cleared or purged, the same thing is reflected by Presidium on our caching engine. And time is very important here, right? So how long it takes for cache invalidation to happen on all the caching levels. You want the plugin level, if you want it, fine, it's up to you. Then you have like the caching engine that I mentioned before, the varnish. Then you have the edge caching. If all of this doesn't get invalidated quickly enough, you're still going to have problems. You're going to have someone accessing the web page. So let's say you push the button and it takes 3 seconds for cache invalidation to happen on every layer. But so you push the button, 1 second has passed, half the layers have been cleaned. Someone accesses the website. The website is now cached on like a wrong version of the website is cached at one of the layers, and the 3 seconds is up now. Get it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pain. So what we're proud of is having all of that process for cache invalidation happening under 200 milliseconds. When you push the button, it's 200 milliseconds.
Which is a lot, because like, in fact, Andreas also comment like purging the cache on Cloudflare can be difficult. Like sometimes I notice myself, you clear the cache and it can take some time, sometimes hours, it depends. So, and nowadays, as you are saying, like time is very important, especially if you have some important page updates or whatever. Like you want to use caching at its best, of course, because it saves in terms of performance and stuff. But you also, when you have a change on your website, especially a big change, you want it to be out there as soon as possible. You don't have to wait 24 hours until the caching expires. And so, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem with like, things, the address, the comment about the Cloudflare. It's because that's how the infrastructure is set up. Right, so it's working as expected. It's not that it's doing something wrong. It's not that their service is not good, because their service is pretty big. But I will disagree with anyone who says that like it helps security, because it doesn't. It does if you know exactly what rules to configure, and if you can configure like 200 rules for by default, and if you can inject dynamic rules. Then it does.
Then yes, but for the 95% of the cases, normal user.
It doesn't really help with security. Oh, it really helps with DDoS protection. I mean, their network is huge. They can really mitigate a lot of traffic. So DDoS is fun. I'm sure you know a lot about it too. If you're being DDoSed, you can't really do anything about it. I mean, the traffic has to go somewhere at the end of the day. The only thing you can do about the traffic is make it go somewhere else.
I remember, apart from normal, as in like they're all normal DDoS, but I remember, I forgot when, maybe a few years ago, there was a DDoS attack on a number of, on the root DNS servers or something like that. And like all the major websites on the internet were offline. They weren't actually offline, it's just the DNS weren't responding. So, I forgot what, I'm not sure which network it was. It's been a few years, I think. I'll find the article, I'll send it to you via email. But I remember like, big websites like Facebook, etc., were down for a few minutes or hours. I'm not sure about the details. I might be butchering it, but yeah, it was a DDoS attack against some root DNS servers of some network. So of course, like some major websites were completely unreachable. The websites were online, the web server, but of course, the DNS server wasn't resolving the IP addresses, so people couldn't reach the websites.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
It's funny because it's like literally if you make like an image of a DDoS in your head, it's that the dam in your village has broken and it's all being flooded, and you're just trying to take like big pieces of wood to make the water go a different way, because the water has to go somewhere.
Exactly, yeah, it has to go unless you block it somehow. But yeah, you can, yeah.
Cloudflare is good at that. Their network is huge.
It's a very huge network, yeah.
Yeah, they can mitigate a lot of traffic, but you don't get extra security, and you don't necessarily get extra performance specifically configured for WordPress websites. Yeah, for static websites you do, or for static sites you do, but something with dynamic content, no, you have to sit there and configure the rules.
Yeah, you have to do it all by yourself and play around. Exactly, yeah.
Which I didn't know what that was. So I haven't used Cloudflare in a long time, and I didn't know that they had the APO service. And I asked on Twitter, I was like, what's this? And I didn't really understand what it did. So from my understanding, it just pre-configures the basic rules that you need to cache everything on your website and to respect the do not cache headers that WordPress already uses, like for logged in users, for example.
Yeah, I think most services nowadays, I mean, like we're all heading, even like as you said, even Pressidium, like we're all heading towards trying to automate as much as we can for the users. So like making it even way easier for the users, kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, we're getting there. Christos, thanks. It was really eye-opening today. Definitely, there's a much more which we can discuss. Maybe we'll invite you again. Definitely. Anything you'd like to mention? We forgot to mention. I think you think it's important, worth mentioning.
It's a difficult one. I don't know. Caching and security goes hand in hand, and don't rely on any single point of information to actually believe that it's happening or not.
Exactly. And I think maybe it applies to everyone. Keep your software up to date, quite frankly. Whatever you use.
Read an article. And actually test things too. I think that's the best thing you can ever do. Probably with security too, like pen testing. You actually end up testing a solution to see if it works or not. The same thing goes for performance. You can tell me your site is fast, that it's performant, that it, I don't know, is light speed fast. But if you don't test it, you can't. It's not true.
Yeah, no, testing is crucial. Security for everything. Testing is very crucial. Like even when developing software, quite frankly, it's very crucial. Christos, thanks a lot.
Keep testing.
Sorry?
Yeah, so it's keep updated and keep testing.
Exactly, yeah. And you're thanks a lot, Christos. A quick reminder for everyone, we do this every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European time or 10 a.m. Eastern time. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining, and special thanks to Christos for sharing all this information. There's much more we can cover. Hopefully we'll have you again the next one. Thanks, Christos.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day. Thanks.